Welcome back. Changing course a bit, let's move from Capitol Hill to the Supreme Court and discuss some news from the 9. On November 12th, oral arguments began in the case looking at President Trump's efforts to terminate the immigration plan known as DACA. DACA, of course, is an Obama-era project that's intended to protect immigrants who were brought to the United States as children. Way back when, on September 5th, 2017, President Trump announced his plans to scale back on DACA, putting the lives of several hundreds of thousands of dreamers, those who are here illegally, who were brought in as children, at risk. Now, as I mentioned, the Supreme Court is reviewing a case investigating whether or not President Trump acted within his administrative powers when rolling back on the program. But, I mean, who cares, right? Republicans have a 5-4 majority in the court, so it'll be a clear win for the president, won't it be? Well, not so fast, not necessarily, as we're seeing a bit of an ideological blur on the bench. But first, let's start with the actual DACA case. Andrew, we'll go to you first. Do you think that the Trump administration has the constitutional right to scale back on DACA?
The Trump administration, DACA was an executive order. Just from a pure legal standpoint, yeah, the Trump administration has a right to rescind executive orders. I think that it is an utterly immoral decision to do so, and it's looking like the legal case they've made to the Supreme Court is very shaky. But looking at it from a moral standpoint, look, there are a ton of problems our country has. Not a single one of those problems is a kid our age who was brought across the border, not of their own volition, at 3 months old or something like that, is an upstanding member of our society, of our civic nation. Like, look, that's a precondition for being accepted to DACA, that you're not haven't committed crimes, you haven't done anything like that. These are individuals who are in school. These are individuals that are contributing to society. And look, there are very few issues that are benefited by framing them in stark moral terms, but I think this is one of them. I'm
going to move on. On the right, what's your response? Do you think that the president has a constitutional right to withdraw?
Mm-hmm. Well, Grace and I were talking before the show, actually. We have peers here at GW who benefit from this DACA program. We have friends who are DACA recipients. And by and large, you see bipartisan support for this program, that these people are, as you said, disproportionately upstanding members of society, and they should be protected. There is legal question as to whether the DACA rollout, as done by the Obama administration, is constitutional. To set new public policy like that with the stroke of the president's pen. I think we've had problems with that in the Trump administration too, with too broad executive action. I think that's fair criticism across party lines over the past 2 administrations. But I do think I can see clear signs of where we can make bipartisan progress here. There should be a legislative solution to this issue. I do think constitutionally there's a case that it shouldn't have been done through the executive branch.
All right.
I can jump in here real quick.
Go for it.
Okay. So the only reason that it had to be issued by executive order is because, not to be partisan, but Republicans would not play ball. When the DREAM Act was being worked on, it was Republicans who refused to vote for it and allow it to be passed into law. Obama's executive order was a last-ditch effort to make sure that these kids our age, were protected. We're not sent back to crime-ridden countries which they had no recollection or memory of. And so I think that's incredibly important. I also think leadership comes from the top. I think, yeah, there should be a legislative solution, but leadership in the Republican Party is coming from Trump and the Trump administration. The Trump administration has shown no willingness whatsoever to make any moves on this, which is incredibly disturbing.
So I want to jump in with another point now. At one point, President Trump said DACA recipients would be, quote, safe. A time later, he's now moving to terminate the program. What does this say about President Trump's stance and handle on immigration issues? There are almost 700,000 DACA recipients in this country. Josh, like you mentioned, some of them are our peers. Where are these 700,000 people going to go? What does this say about Trump's handle on the issue? I'll throw it to the Republicans first.
Well, I would just say, to kind of respond to your points, there were mistakes, sure, made by our members of our party in Congress not dealing with this legislatively. I don't think the solution to dealing with that problem is to enact unconstitutional executive orders. I think that the solution is leadership from the top to broker a deal of some kind across party lines. Now, whether President Trump has embodied that consistent leadership from the top that we need to have a deal here, I don't know. But he has stated that he wants Congress to act to solve this through a legislative compromise. So hopefully we will see.
What do you think a legislative compromise would look like?
Well, I think what we're seeing here is potential for DACA to be enshrined into law and some sort of border security measures be combined. I think it's important that we don't use, again, our peers as bargaining chips for anything too absurd to ask for, but I think border security is something that Democrats too say they support, so it shouldn't be anything too controversial to
Keith,
partner
your
with.
response?
Going back to your point about President Trump ensuring that these DACA recipients would be safe, this president also said that he would protect LGBTQ individuals. We can see that the president doesn't always say what he's going to do. For this legislative compromise, we cannot compromise on the human rights of hundreds of thousands of individuals, many of which are our fellow students. We cannot. I think that Josh has the right point that we should enshrine DACA into law. When you talk about border security, I think we should talk a little bit more about what that means. I don't think it should mean some useless wall that we're going to spend millions of taxpayer dollars on and jeopardize our diplomatic relations with Mexico with. When we talk about border security, let's actually talk about facilitating a pathway to citizenship, hiring more immigration justices to make the process get faster and to get these people in safer and more efficiently.
So now I want to take a step back and not just look at DACA, but look at the entire makeup of the bench, of the Supreme Court. Like I mentioned before, there seems to be sort of an ideological blur on the bench, being that Chief Justice Roberts has turned into sort of a swing vote. We just saw this summer with the citizenship question, he sided with the Democrats. So sources are saying, reports are saying that right now John Roberts is a bit unsure of how he will rule on this DACA case. What does it say about the bench? What does it say about the time we are currently living in that John Roberts, who's supposed to be a staunch Republican, key Republican vote, is now siding with the Democrats a lot and questioning his stance? Does this have anything to say about maybe his perspectives are changing, which is totally allowed, or does this have to say about the Trump era we're living in and the inability for him to be able to side with the Trump era ideology? What do you got? Josh, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, I wouldn't attribute this necessarily to Roberts wavering on whether the president, whether DACA itself was constitutional in the first place. But I think there's legal questions in this specific case about the specific rollback of DACA, the steps that the administration has to take in order to roll back a policy like that. There's certain statutory requirements that may not have been met in this rollout case. I'll let the justices, Ivy League educated, very smart, much more educated on this.
GW is pretty good.
I'm doing my best.
You're on GW TV.
But I think there's legal questions here that kind of speak to the uneasiness.
And that is why they're looking at this court case in particular. But I'm talking about not just DACA. I'm talking about a bird's eye view of the whole. We've seen Justice Roberts become more of a swing vote, and we've seen the perspectives of some justices change a bit on the bench. Do you think this has anything to attribute to the current era we're living in, or are people just taking different perspectives on certain issues, which they are absolutely entitled to?
I can only guess. I would think it's more of the latter. Justices have always tended to change over their course in the time as they gain more experience, but I could leave it to anyone else to jump in.
So I think that looking at it from, like you said, in terms of the context of the Trump era, the judiciary has been repeatedly besieged by the Trump administration. It's evident that Trump doesn't understand why we have a judiciary to check and balance the presidency. And if you look at even public statements that John Roberts has made, he said, we do not have Republican or Democratic justices, we just have justices. Chief Justice Roberts, as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, look, the Chief Justice is always going to have one eye looking at not only his own legacy or her own legacy, but on the legacy and the longevity and the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. I think that John Roberts is going to have a lot on his mind in terms of trying to make it abundantly clear that the judiciary will not roll over in the face of the president, and that the judiciary will retain its important role in calling balls and strikes in terms of the law.
Keith, I saw you raising your hand really quickly if you want to add in.
Yeah, just to go off of Andrew's point, Justice Roberts definitely wants to end this narrative that the court is a purely counter-majoritarian institution now. He wants to ensure people that it's not going to be consistently making conservative calls just because there is a 5-4 majority by Republican-appointed justices. And Justice Roberts has actually a very long record of being the swing vote on the Supreme Court, going back to 2010, I believe it was, when he upheld the individual mandate for the ACA. So this is somebody who can, in some instances, put judicial or ideological preferences aside and purely look at the law.
Grace, any last words?
I believe that Justice John Roberts, he has the right to change his opinion over time. I mean, justices, they're not supposed to be Democrat or Republican. They're supposed to do their jobs and, interpret the law in the right way. And if his opinions are changing over time, then that's perfectly valid. He's just improving his skill within the bench and trying to make this country even better.
Fair points, great conversation, awesome discourse, and that'll be the last word with that segment. But after this break, it's rapid fire. Stay with us.